Good morning. Welcome to Stop Drifting Live. I'm your host and your coach, Dr. Cynthia. Here's what I know about the women watching right now. She has built something, a career, a life, maybe a family, and somewhere in the middle of all of that building, she stopped paying attention to her own financial foundation. Or life made that decision for her. A divorce, a death of a spouse, a retirement she didn't see coming. Suddenly, she's standing in front of a financial picture she didn't design, and she needs to figure out what to do next. Research tells us that only 1 in 3 women feels confident managing her finances independently. 1 in 3. And yet, we're living on average 6 years longer than the men in our lives. That math matters. My guest today has spent decades helping women change that math through a career pivot that started at IBM, ran through more than 40 years in sales and business development, and landed finally exactly where she was meant to be, at the intersection of financial planning and life transition. She is a wealth advisor, a certified divorce financial analyst, a family law mediator, and the co founder of Your Divorce Made Simple. And she is here because she believes, as I do, that the most powerful thing a woman can do is make her next financial decision from a place of strength, not fear. I'm so happy to have Amy Colton with us today. Amy, welcome to the live show.
Thank you so much. I'm so glad to be here.
I want to jump right in for the folks that are either tuning in live right now on Facebook, YouTube, or LinkedIn, or for those maybe who are listening back later. And I was really intrigued when you and I first met around this whole notion of divorce made simple. I think I shared with you my daughter recently went through a divorce. I've unfortunately been through a divorce. I know we are pro marriage and pro relationship, but it happens. Life's messy. Talk about the inception of that whole concept around divorce made simple.
When I became a financial advisor, and you said it wasn't my first career, I wanted to support women. I had started out in technology, and it was very few women in the technology world when I started. And now I'm in a male-dominated industry as well. Financial services, I think only about 15% are women. So I really wanted to support women in my journey. And, even if I was talking to a couple, I wanted to make sure the woman was part of the conversation. And that was my goal, to educate and guide women from a financial perspective. And I started focusing on life transitions. And the three biggest one, as you mentioned, death of a loved one, divorce, and you know, retirement. And then the fourth one is actually sudden inheritance. And you could have more than one of those transitions, but those were the four major ones. And also at the same time I started doing this kind of work, there was a divorce attorney, a local one, who didn't want to do divorce anymore because she just found it so stressful. So she started sending her clients to me, and she would say to them, hey, if you can work things out with Amy, then you can come back to me. I'll file the paperwork and I'll write the divorce decree. And what I found is a couple things. One, I could get through the process more quickly of getting people to come to an agreement than using two attorneys. Two, I love doing it. And three, people need financial advice when they're going through this process. They're splitting up the marital estate, and so many times they don't understand the financial and tax ramifications of their decisions. And so over the years, I've continued to build this practice because I think it's so important. I think when people are going through divorce, they need three guides. They need an emotional guide, they need a financial guide, they need a legal guide. But for some reason, they forget that they need a financial guide. And what do they fight about? Money, financial, all the stuff that they really need a guide for. And so many times decisions are made without, because they use their attorneys as the financial professional. And remember, attorneys are a legal professional, not a financial professional. So it's so important to use a financial professional when you're going through this journey.
That's huge. And you're right, because I think back in my own life experience and folks that have been close to me going through this. I can't think of an example where somebody had the foresight to use or involve a financial expert. I mean, heaven forbid if I were going through something like that today. I'm established with a financial planner at this point in my life, but certainly 20 years ago, I wasn't. So I think that's such sage advice. The other thing, too, is that I think most of us, and maybe this is where that connects, I think most of us, many people, think of divorce as a legal process. But you're really offering something that's beyond what attorneys will even touch or have the expertise to do.
Right. And I like to work with clients, if possible, ideally, before they hire an attorney, while they're working with an attorney, and then make sure that they are on a sound financial foundation after the divorce. Because really, you need to understand what life is going to look like after divorce for you. And you need to know, it when you're negotiating with
Mhm.
your soon to be ex partner about to make sure that you're getting what you need. Um, I look at the budgets, I look at cash flow, I look at what your lifestyle is going to be. Somebody wants to stay in the house. Well, they have to be realistic. Can they afford it? Can they get a mortgage on their own? What is that going to do to their cash flow post divorce? So, all these things need to be considered while you're going through divorce. And a lot of times you don't get the advice that you need from an attorney. They're not financial professionals. So, there was a survey that was done, small, but I think is really important, to people going through divorce, because 76% of the people going through divorce use their attorney as a financial professional, and 77% wish they hadn't. I'm sure it's a rounding error, but the point being is they didn't realize that they needed this kind of advice. And sometimes we run into situations that may not affect you today, but will affect you 2, 3, 4 years down the line that you didn't anticipate.
Right, right. I even think about things like um, individuals perhaps where the woman stayed home raising the children, and so the 401k or those kinds of investments were specifically in the husband's name. And dividing those things up, the tax implications of how that's handled when that money comes over, and making sure that's sort of just and equitable, is another complicated thing that you're just perhaps walking into it thinking, well, 50%. Well, 50% means a lot of different things when you start to have penalties and tax implications, etc. Yeah.
Well, the thing about the 401k, and I tell my clients this all the time, you have $1 million in a 401k. That's not really $1 million, because that 401k has not been taxed, and it will be taxed in the future. And you have to consider that that's a taxable asset. Now, the house may or may not be a taxable asset. So, for example, if one party is taking the house and the other is taking the 401k, and I say may or may not because it really depends on the situation, that may not be equal. For example, and the house is usually the biggest asset that most people have,
Mhm.
but um, if you've got a lot of equity in your house, okay, say you bought your house for $500,000 and now it's worth 1.5 million. Well, you've got $1 million of equity in the house. So when you go to sell it, you have to pay taxes on the gain.
Mhm.
And that has to be taken into consideration when you're negotiating the split. Because if you say you want to keep the house just until the kids are out of high school and then you plan to sell it, you just need to know that you're going to have a capital gain issue when you go to sell it. And that has to be negotiated now, even though you're not planning on selling it. Now, that's
Mhm.
not true in all cases. If you don't have a lot of equity in a house, say you bought the house for $1 million and it's still worth $1 million, there's no equity there in that situation. So, if you're keeping the house, you don't have to worry about the taxes. But you
Right.
know that no matter what, that 401k is going to be taxed in the future, and you have to accommodate for that.
That's a perfect example, and I feel like I'm pretty financially astute. Certainly not to the level of your expertise, but that's a perfect example because again, my mind went to, you're splitting the asset, not necessarily thinking downstream about whoever inherits that asset or how that ever lines out. There could be tax implications. Is another perfect example of why talking to somebody who's thinking through those details, particularly because it is generally a really emotional time, and feelings are raw and high, and you may not be thinking as clearly and logically, particularly if there's anger or resentment or other things that sometimes come along with divorce. Um, you also are involved in mediation. So, and that's a piece as well that traditionally divorces may not necessarily lean to. Talk a little bit about mediation as a process and how that might be considered for the person listening.
There's so many things around mediation that people are confused about, first of all. Typically, what happens is if you hire a lawyer, your husband hires a lawyer, and you can't get to an agreement, as a last resort, they're going to send you to mediation. It is a costly thing at that point because you got to pay the lawyers and you got to pay the mediator. And so, what I do that's very different is I start with mediation. If I'm working with a couple, and I have two paths in my practice, one is where I work with a couple and we sit down, we look at everything in the marital estate, and we talk about who wants what and how do we divide it fairly. We will do that when I'm working with a couple. The other path is I usually work with one individual. It's the individual that didn't handle the finances during the marriage, but wants a trusted guide to help them understand it while they're going through this because they don't want to make mistakes. They don't want to overlook things. But let's just talk about the path where I'm working with a couple. We start with mediation, and so my mediation is a little different than what I call formal mediation. Formal mediation, you go into a room, you're probably in separate rooms, whether it's separate Zoom rooms or separate physical rooms, and the mediator goes back and forth talking to each other and trying to get you to come to an agreement, whether it's 4 hours, 8 hours, or until you get it done in that day. I don't do it that way because I split it up into 2 hour max segments. Because a lot of times people will get emotional and it allows them to calm down
Mm-hmm.
before we go to the next session, and it allows them to, go do some research, maybe ask some questions. A lot of times we do it before we even approach the attorneys. So that is the most cost efficient, time efficient, and amicable way to do this, but not everybody can do it. But if you can, it is the most time and efficient and cost efficient to sit down. You're in separate Zoom rooms, but you're having the same conversation together. And so that's a very, very different way that I do it than most traditional mediations. The other thing is, you usually go to these when you can't come to an agreement, and it's a last resort before going to court. But I like to do it up front. We talk about it, we discuss it, we go over all the ramifications, and then we bring in the attorneys. Again, it's not possible for everybody, but about 80% of the people I see, it is possible for.
When Amy, and I love that, by the way, and I think for the person listening who is considering terminating the marriage, difficult time, but wants it to be as amicable as possible, just because that's what they want, or because there's children involved also, which creates complications. Um, if a couple is able to come together and through that upfront mediation reach an agreement, basically amicably divide all of that up, they both then don't need an attorney at that point. Is that right? Is it can it simply be filed under that negotiated agreement? What would be the next steps? I'm thinking for the person that wants it to be simple, doesn't want it to get ugly.
I typically, what I recommend is that after we've gotten to this agreement, and it's not a binding agreement, okay? I don't have
Mhm.
anybody sign anything, or they can change their minds. But and that's a little different from formal mediation. Formal mediation,
Okay.
if you come to an agreement, you sign it, and that goes into the divorce decree. But I typically recommend that they get an attorney or an attorney service to write the divorce decree. And what I do is I give them everything we agreed upon, all the financials and anything else, any verbiage that needs to go into the divorce decree. I will give that to them to take to their attorney. Only one party really needs to hire an attorney. The
Right.
other party who's not represented, I suggest that they get an attorney to review the document after it's written, just for peace of mind. Did they miss
Sure.
anything? They don't have to do that, but it's just, I recommend it. I've had some couples use a service, which is very inexpensive, but it has to be a fairly simple
Hmm.
agreement for them to do that. Um, I would say 3/4 of a divorce decree, if you've got minor children, are about visitation, holiday schedules, where you have to live. Only 25% is relative to the financials,
Right.
but you got to get it right. Um, and so I typically, will have them, go to an attorney to write up the actual degree. It is a legal document, and I think attorneys should do it.
Yeah, that
But
makes
a
sense.
lot of the expense that you incur when you're hiring attorneys is gathering all the financial information, um, and then the two attorneys negotiating on your behalf. So if
Right.
you can eliminate that, that's a big legal cost that you could eliminate if possible.
Absolutely. Absolutely. I want to shift gears. You have a book, The Kitchen Table Divorce, and talk a little bit about what that looks like. What is a kitchen table divorce? And maybe that's what you've just described. But I'm excited the book is available wherever great books are sold. So talk a little bit about that and the genesis of that.
So the kitchen table divorce is really about my journey doing this kind of work over the past 10 years. And I do a couple things in the book. First of all, I explain a lot of options that are out there, in terms of divorce. Things like, what is collaborative divorce? What is, a contested divorce? But I go through a lot of terms that people need to know and options that they need to know that they have. One of the things that we were talking about mediation before that I didn't mention is you don't have to have an attorney to go to mediation. You can find a mediator and go to a mediator, whether you do it through the, the kitchen table divorce process, which I just described, or you just go to a mediator, because a mediator doesn't represent either party. It's a neutral third party. And all a mediator does is try to get the couple to come to an agreement, the two people to
Hmm.
come to. So a lot of people get confused about that. But the kitchen table divorce is actually a term one of my clients used many years ago, and it just stuck with me visually, to sit down at the kitchen table and hash things out. That was the whole genesis of, the concept of what I try to do with my clients is sit down, let's discuss it, let's talk about, hey, can you afford it? What's your cash flow? What's your budget? What are the tax ramifications? So that everybody's on the same page and understands what these decisions are going to be made. So that was the whole genesis of it. Like I say, this client came to me and she wanted to sort everything out before she hired an attorney. And to me, that's the best way to do it, because don't go to an attorney until you understand what's realistic for your future. The more work you can do before you hire an attorney, the, the, the quicker it's gonna the quicker it's gonna take, and the less money it's gonna cost. I mean, the
Right.
subtitle of my book is a practical guide for finalizing your divorce in 90 days, and typically that's what it takes, about 90 days to hash everything out. I have done it over and over and over again, with couples, and that's about what it takes, because you got people's schedules. So I just tend to do about 2 Zoom calls 4 hours each over a period of 3 months before we
Mhm.
get to an agreement. And that's been the norm. The other thing that, that's really important too when you're going through this process is you just, you, and I write about this in my book, how much money I have saved people from getting the right financial advice. Anywhere between $5,000 and $85,000 in savings because of the advice they get from a financial. And that doesn't even take into consideration how much money you save by not using two attorneys in the beginning.
Right.
Now, there
Right.
are some cases where you have to have attorneys right from the get-go. But I'm talking about the 80% that don't need it right away.
Right. Right. I wish I had met you, 20 years ago. And we'll continue to, reference you and send people your direction because it's powerful to me. It seems so logical when you talk about it.
Hmm.
And yet it was so not on my radar, even guiding my own daughter through this process, right? Um, I did have her speak with my financial planner just as a linking up point, but it was pretty far down the process and it wasn't specific about the divorce. It was more, this specific topic within the context. This idea of emotional support, financial support, legal support, instead of assuming it's just all this legal process. And with great respect for amazing attorneys that are out there that do great things, um, financial planning is not their area of expertise. So you're leaving potentially, if you, particularly if you have any degree of assets, if you've bought a home together, if you have investment accounts together, obviously if you have children, etc. Huge.
This is the way I look at the world, okay? You need a lawyer for alimony, child support, and child visitation. Anything else, you need a financial advisor. And not just any financial advisor. You really want a financial advisor who deals in divorce, who really understands the nuances of divorce. And I think, what you're talking about is most people don't know we exist.
Right.
You know?
Exactly.
And I think also a lot of times when people hire a lawyer, they pay a big retainer and now they don't want to have to spend the money on a financial advisor. And so now I was talking to an attorney, and like attorneys, like you say, there's some good attorneys out there, but there's also some not good attorneys out there. And I was talking to an attorney the other day in the Bay Area because I work all over the country. And I also, when I do work, outside of Texas, which is my home state, I try to find attorneys that I can collaborate with because that's the best of both worlds. So I was talking to an attorney in the Bay Area, and she said she tells all of her clients to hire a CDFA, a Certified Divorce Financial Analyst. And I said, Amen. Finally, somebody gets it,
Yeah.
because, and I have attorneys that say to me, my eyes roll over when I look at taxes or anything financial.
Right.
But I will tell you that it's so important, and this is really sad, but it's so important to understand what's in your tax return. So many of my clients sign a tax return and have no clue what's in it because they just don't know, or their husbands don't tell them. And you got to be really, really careful down the line because you sign that tax return. If your husband is doing something fraudulent or unethical, and that shows up in the tax return, and they come after the couple, you're responsible. And I want to tell you, you think it doesn't happen? It happens a lot. I have a client, and I didn't go through her divorce with her, but she came to me after her divorce. She just got a tax bill from 2014 when she was married for over $500,000. Over $500,000. And it really was because she was on the tax return But fortunately, in the divorce decree, it states that she is not responsible for any taxes during the marriage, and that was a taxable event during the marriage. Thank God for that. But that's an extreme situation. But I have seen some instances where the husband has filed the tax return erroneously,
Right.
and you're on the line. I'll give you an example. One of my clients, her husband's a W-2 employee. He just filed a Schedule C. His income comes from W-2 work, and to make this very clear, bring it down to what that means,
Well, yeah.
is file a Schedule C unless you're a independent contractor, a 1099 employee. So he was taking the funds from his W-2 paycheck and writing off expenses on a Schedule C because he had an LLC. But the LLC wasn't generating the income. And there was 187,000 he wrote out. My client's responsible for half that tax bill if the IRS comes after it.
Right.
Now, those are the things we look at when we do this work. It's not just budgeting and cash flow, it's also any financial exposure that you have from a tax perspective.
I have a friend whose daughter is going in the process of a divorce, and I just made a note to myself about reaching out to her after today's live show because I suspect that that could be an area of potential concern. So, for the person listening now or in the future, um, this information as you're listening may not connect specifically to your situation right now, but think about those loved ones, friends, etc., that may also need this information. One of the things that you also do, I'm gonna before we kind of run out of time here, I want to pivot because we started the show with this. I was just talking to a client yesterday about financial planning around retirement, not giving her advice, but she was talking about some concerns about being ready for retirement. You also work with, and specifically women, and we know that the data is very clear that a high percentage of women end up in a very difficult financial situation post divorce. But you also work with individuals when there's a death of a spouse or an unexpected retirement. Talk a little bit about where that fits in. I just want the person listening now or later to have that point of view as well about services that you offer.
Yeah. So as a wealth advisor, I do financial planning, and so the divorce business is a separate business, but the two are related because they both need financial guidance.
Sure.
But understanding retirement, and most of my clients are what they call in the gray divorce space. So that's divorce after 50. But they want to understand Social Security benefits, whether it's a death of a loved one, whether it's a divorce, they're a little different. So I need to look at that. We also need to look at, what kind of income streams they need for longevity so that they don't run out of money.
Mhm.
So there's a lot of post-divorce planning that needs to go into retirement planning or what your life's going to look like. Life goals and financial goals are intertwined. Everybody's different, everybody's budget's different, everybody's life goals are different, and it really is no cookie cutter approach to that. So it's really important. A lot of my clients will, after the divorce is over, continue to be my clients, coming over to the wealth management side, and having me make sure they stay on a good financial path moving forward. When you're using an attorney, the attorney's done when the divorce is
Right.
done. But I'm not done with my clients after the divorce. We're just getting started on really creating the next chapter of their life.
I love it. And just remind me, so I know you're located in Texas, you work around the country, so you can work with clients in any state on the divorce side, as well as the continuing
Yes.
on into the financial.
Yep.
Okay, great.
Okay. Yes. I work all over the country. I have lots of clients, um, you know, at one point I actually was going to take on an international case. They decided not to use me, but we were in so many different time zones. I didn't know how I was going to do it, but
Right.
it didn't come to fruition. But really, I can work with anybody. With Zoom, we really can do just about anything. And again, um, when I do work out of state, I usually work in collaboration with an attorney, and I'll help my clients find the right attorney. I do that all the time. I will literally go out and interview them and vet them for my clients. Whether it's in Texas, where I know a lot of attorneys in Texas because a lot of my work's in Texas, but I've worked in California, Massachusetts, you know, um, and uh, I have a network of professionals that I will deal with because, again, you will need an attorney. The things that are different from state to state are alimony and child support. So, a
Mhm.
lot of that, you will need an attorney for those things.
Absolutely. Yeah, and I'm sure you've identified the ones that you really love working with because they've been super collaborative, et cetera, which is amazing. You have something, I want to make sure the person listening hears this. You have a top 20 tips on divorce. It can be it's available on Amazon, but for anyone who's listening and reaches out to you, you'll send them a complimentary copy. It's the 27 most asked questions with answers, as I understand it. What's the best place for folks to get a hold of you if they're listening and they're saying, I need to get my hands on that?
You can reach out to me at amy@yourdivorcemadesimple.com. And I am offering the free ebook, the 27 top tips on divorce. And also, I also will give a free 1 hour consultation to anybody who would like to sit down and talk about their specific situation. So,
That is
Amy at
amazing.
yourdivorcemadesimple.com is the way to best get a hold of me.
Awesome. And we'll put all of that in the show notes for those who are watching this later or referring back in case you're listening and on a walk or a drive and you're not able to see this at this moment or write it down. We'll make sure that's in there. Amy, before we wrap up, just a couple of reflections. Thank you for what you do. I think just in my own limited frame of reference, I have watched women and younger women, interestingly enough, who have been in a situation where they didn't have as much control, insight, etc., around the financials. I know there's probably a lot of powerful women listening going, I can't imagine. But it's still happening. And even in situations where you have, very strong dual incomes, there's still a lot to go through that process. And just as I'm listening to you, so many things that I'm thinking, gosh, I would have never thought about that. I didn't think about that either. So thank you for supporting individuals going through such a difficult time. Nobody signs up and gets married because they want to go through a divorce, but unfortunately, life happens. And if we can do it as amicably and equitably as possible, so that everybody moves on to the next chapter, I think ultimately that's a winning outcome. I always like to end both my podcast, Climbing the Corporate Ladder Without Breaking a Heel, and the live show with one small thing you would invite the woman listening to do today. So if somebody is contemplating or in the early stages of divorce, what's the one small thing you recommend they do today?
I think it's really important to get financial knowledge, whether you get it through a financial advisor, whether you get it through someone like me, whether you just learn it on your own. I do seminars, I do webinars, and I always have because I think it's an important education. We need to be educated on this, and so many women aren't. So that would be my one advice is to get educated however you do it.
Yeah, absolutely. Well, thank you. Thank you so much for being a part of this work. Thank you for being a part of the Stop Drifting live show, where we're really focused on, in this aspect, trying to help you focus on your prosperity health, making certain that as you look at all the dimensions of your human flourishing, if you're going through a difficult life change, that prosperity health is one of the important portions, in addition to your emotional health and getting through the legal process. Thank you for joining the live show. All the information and links will be in the comments so you can get a hold of Amy, and also be sure to connect with Amy Colton on LinkedIn. If you want, you can also private message her there. Until next time, thanks everybody. I've got you and you've got this.